I would like to close the hot take segment with one final hot take from you.
Okay.
And a personal favorite subject of ours, of course, Bigfoot. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Gigantopithecus.
Yes.
What's your hot take?
So, out of all the paranormal things that I think could be true, Bigfoot would be the most likely. And here's why. Because we are still discovering a variety of species in parts of the world. I don't remember what year it was, but maybe it was 2 years ago. They talked about, they have found 40 different new species in the Amazon of various reptiles and amphibians, birds, whatever. And I think if there is anything that is likely to be true,
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic drew their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah.
All things unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Hello, all you unexplained ones. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another exciting show. We are grateful to each and every one of you for tuning in. If you haven't yet, please do hit that subscribe button, share, like, comment. We love to hear all of your thoughts. We have some of the most intelligent people that join us in these chat rooms, and we hope that you will send your comments this way tonight. Before we begin, I am CJ Derringer. I am your host, along with my co-hosts, Dr. Tim Mounts and Smitty Neves. We have a very intelligent person, Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, joining us. She is an anthropologist, a professor from San Jose State University. She's also an author who has recently released a book called On the Warpath. I love this. My battle with Indians, Pretendians, and woke warriors. So I think we've got a lot to dive into on this show. She's also a board member of the National Association of Scholars. So we get to pick her brain about all kinds of fun things, unexplained things, maybe some controversial things. We'll dive into it in just a moment. All Things Unexplained is free to watch on YouTube and listen to wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support our show, you can visit our YouTube store. Additionally, you can find us on Venmo under All Things Unexplained. Be sure to check out our website, allthingsunexplained.com. All proceeds from the sales of Dr. Mounts' books on Amazon and Audible also go straight to our show.
This is Dr. Mounts. I'm joined by Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, anthropologist, and we're continuing our discussion on Neanderthal. Yeah, and they actually brought up another hypothesis on this show that I'm watching this documentary about Neanderthals for the flowers at the what they think is a burial site, and that is they discovered this animal, some sort of weasel or something, that tends to burrow and bury and bring and drag along flowers and plants with it.
Right. And rodents can do a lot of damage to skeletal remains, and sometimes forensic anthropologists have mistaken rodent gnawings for knife wounds. So rodents it can be very destructive. But it also reminds me, I have a home in Tucson. It also reminds me of pack rats, right? And they can build their homes, their little middens of junk and so forth. I think the oldest pack rat midden that has been excavated, they dated back to like 1,000 years. So like some of these, uh, rodents are very clever and, can easily change the environment. There's also the Homo, I think it's Homo naledi, who is in the cave sites from South Africa, that they Lee Berger discovered, and he had suggested that these might be early ritual burials at around 200,000 years ago, but others have suggested that maybe it's rodent activity that took those bones in, and that's a very likely possibility. Those are the only other bones that are in those caves, are rodent
Right.
bones.
I think that's a brilliant hypothesis. And,
Yeah,
I think it's telling that rodents outlived and survived all these mega creatures and megafauna. I
yeah,
mean, it
yes.
wasn't it wasn't these giant creatures and the dinosaurs and the mammoths that kept going on. It wasn't the Neanderthal either. It was but
It was
rodents. They
little rodents.
proliferated. And I think
And
that was a
and they're
great point you
proliferating
had.
still, right? They're proliferating still. I mean,
Oh,
they
big time.
not only in Tucson, but right here where I am. I'm sure there are a lot of my little rodent friends scurrying around in the subway tonight.
Well, that was a great point you had about scavenger damage being confused with injury or something else. And you brought up the Clovis culture. And I want to put a little image on the screen because I would love your hot take on the Clovis culture. And if you think that this is an accurate depiction of early people's interaction with the mammoth. So they're
Yeah, it's
basically
hard to
hunting it with
say.
spears here or some
We
sort of
do
weapons.
Yeah, we do know that there has been some big game hunting from the Paleo Indians. Our earliest Paleo Indians would have coincided with some of our big megafauna. So, for example, some of the earliest are like 12,000 years old. So that is still, it is overlapping in that time period of the megafauna. There's suggestions, although there's a lot of debate that megafauna were actually in part went extinct because of they were hunted down. Others think by those using the Clovis culture. Others think that it was climate change. It probably was a combination of both. But I think that I suspect that the hunter-gatherers of our Clovis culture and then our later, the Folsom culture and so forth, I suspect they were opportunists. When they could take down a big game animal and try to take it down, they did. And when they could just when they could just get a rabbit, they did that too. So I think that they were opportunists.
Right. I think that's a good theory. And speaking of theories, nobody really knows exactly what did happen to these mega creatures and these Neanderthal. What do you think happened?
With Neanderthals, I'm pretty sure what happened was a combination of the anatomically modern humans outcompeting them, maybe even fighting with them, but definitely outcompeting them with weapons that could be used from a distance, and so they weren't getting injured as much and had a higher rate of success with hunting. That might be. The other thing that could be is that they interbred with humans, but was much smaller gene pool, and therefore their genes were swamped out, and we get those, the small percentage of Neanderthal genes in our gene pool, but the anatomically modern humans was a much bigger population, and so you get this basically take over from that. I think that those two scenarios or a combination of those is very possible. With the megafauna, I think there's good evidence to suggest that humans could have played a key role in eliminating the megafauna, but that climate change also played a role with that. I think that, possibly some of the best examples of megafauna being wiped out by humans, it doesn't occur in the Americas, but like in Madagascar, when humans arrived on Madagascar, there were primates, lemurs, that were the size of gorillas, and they were really slow, and they weren't scared of humans, and humans got onto the island and wiped them out like in a matter of 100 to 300 years. So it's not impossible that humans did in the megafauna too.
Yeah, and the Galapagos, similar
Yes, Galapagos,
situation there.
right. So we have good historical, prehistorical, and good archaeological evidence for it, fossil record evidence that this happened, and so I think that that's it's a plausible scenario.
Yeah, one of the most horrifying things that I learned that happened at the Galapagos is when these pirates and others started coming through on ships and discovering things on the Galapagos. They discovered the Galapagos tortoise, right? The huge
Right,
tortoise. And one of the interesting physical characteristics of the tortoise, which came back to haunt it, was that it could go very long periods of time without eating or drinking, and it would
right,
be just fine. It would live. It would still stay alive. So the pirates and the other folks on these ships, they figured out they could store the tortoises in the ship on their back, like flip them over, and they could just keep them forever, and they wouldn't spoil or anything because they would
right.
just keep living. And that kind of haunted me when I heard that. I was like,
Yeah,
that is a really terrible thing, but
yeah.
that just does go to show you, yeah, that humans can really have a traumatic effect on the landscape.
Right, right. And on other animals. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of disappearing, I would love to get your hot take, maybe just a couple more here. But CJ and I are
Sure.
in North Carolina, and
Hmm.
one of the greatest mysteries here, and it is one of the greatest mysteries in the world, is what happened to the Roanoke colony.
The Roanoke colony. The name rings a bell. It's give me a little bit of background again. It's I'm
So
drawing a
Roanoke, oh
blank.
no, no worry, I threw that one in there. So Roanoke was one of the first colonies settled here in North Carolina, and by all accounts, it was kind of a thriving, bustling situation. But then all of a sudden, they just kind of disappeared, dropped off the map, stopped communicating with England, and
Oh
and
yes.
somebody carved something in the tree. What was that, CJ? It was I think of it. Somebody carved
No
something
idea what you're
in a
talking
tree.
about. None.
No, it's coming back to me now too. Yeah. No, I do know the tale, or the history of it a little bit. I have no idea what happened, but throughout time we do have some colonies that, you know, if there's a small colony and a disease comes in and it just wipes them all out. Another, you know, possibility is that they get to a point of famine, or that then they leave. And we have this in some of the Native American tribes of the Southwest, where they just kind of abandon the site, and because the land is not producing enough anymore, So I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened, but depending, again, it's hard to say if they all died, and then who would be the ones to bury them and, ensure that their remains would be discovered. It's hard to say.
Oh, sure. And apparently it was Croatan,
Hmm.
Croatoan, was the sole complete word found on Roanoke Island by John White on August 18th, 1590, in his search for the English colonist, including his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, whom he had
Hmm.
left there 3
Yeah.
years earlier.
Yeah.
Dare County. I see. These things are falling into place now.
Now
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
getting it, CJ.
Yeah. It's very odd, but I really, yeah, it is one of these mysteries that we might never find out what
Yeah.
happened. Yeah.
And so you did talk about Neanderthal earlier and some missing links and things. And, we mentioned Ötzi the Iceman.
Right.
And I would love to put up an image of Ötzi the Iceman here real quick, which
Oh.
I just think is super interesting. The oldest preserved human body is that of Ötzi, a 53-year-old wet mummy that was found still partially encased in glacial ice in northernmost Italy in 1991.
Can we
Yes,
just
yeah.
note the outfits that these people are wearing in this particular picture?
Yeah.
I know your eye is drawn to the mummy, but check out those 1990s outfits.
Since are they anthropologists or are they going to a Richard Simmons workout session? I don't.
I actually think that those might have been the people, the alpinists who discovered Ötzi,
Oh,
because
Okay.
of
that makes
course,
sense.
they thought he was. I mean, people come out of the ice all the time who died there, right?
Yeah.
And so they didn't think it was a 5,300-year-old remain at first. They thought it was somebody fairly recent. That's
Sure.
how well he was preserved. But then, you know, he also had, of course, like a quiver with him, and I think a bronze little axe, and then he had a little pouch with mushrooms that were probably medicinal. He had these tattoos on various places. And what I think is interesting is he had tattoos on joints that had arthritis. So obviously it had a connection. Likely they thought that those tattoos might help the arthritis. Now, it probably, if you're tattooing yourself or somebody's tattooing you, it probably does take your mind off of the arthritis while it's occurring, but it's not going to help any afterwards, right?
Especially 5,300 years ago. I'm
Yeah.
assuming it might hurt
Uh,
even worse back then.
yes. And I know Ötzi, there was a massive fight over him because the Italians wanted him, the Austrians wanted him, and you know, they came to the conclusion of where should we put him on display, and he's still on display in the I think it's a Tyrol museum, but they go back and forth. It goes back and forth so that they share him. But fascinating individual, and really it kind of turned things on, you know, changed the narrative because it pushed back the Bronze Age to an earlier point because his tool was made out of bronze. They didn't think that they had bronze that early, and he had some injuries. He had a injury, I believe, on his shoulder, maybe even a arrowhead embedded in his shoulder, but he did have an injury on his shoulder. I believe it was an arrowhead embedded in there.
And that
So
reminds me of something one of our listeners said a while ago. It seems like life was pretty tough for these ancient people. Is that how you would sum it up? Or have you, in your experience and your research, Elizabeth, have you noted any evidence of what we might consider a good life?
I would say that life was much tougher, and you have, you know, it almost doesn't depend on where you look. So let's say, you know, the California site that I looked at, the Ryan Mound, which is in the Bay Area, which is likely one of the most luxurious places to live in regards of climate, food, right? In prehistory, it was never too hot, not too cold, had lots to eat, had the ocean food, you know, it had lots of benefits. And yet, what we find is, as I mentioned earlier, their teeth were worn down excessively. They had abscesses that likely killed many of them. They had very severe arthritis for their relative young age. So arthritis that we would see maybe in 70-year-olds, they were seeing in 35-year-olds. They had injuries that ranged from, you know, of course, like obsidian arrowheads embedded into bone, but also, you know, broken arms that weren't set and various other things like that. So their life was tough. But then if you go and look at other places like, you know, like the Paleo Indians, like Kennewick Man, you know, he had arthritis, but and worn down teeth, but he also had broken ribs that had been healed. He had arrowhead embedded in his pelvic bone. So, again, not a very good life. And then if you look at the mummies of, for example, of the North, like the Inuit and the Aleut of the mummies up north in Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, they have osteoporosis really early on because they were not getting enough calcium and vitamin D. But then also they had high levels of parasites like trichinosis from eating undercooked fish and polar bear meat, and lots of injuries from their falls and just their environment. And so I think that we should sometimes count our good fortune, because we are living in kind of this life of luxury that no one in prehistory would have been able to live.
No, that's right. Not to start anything here, but I was noticing these footprints. I think they're called the Laetoli footprints.
Yeah.
I'm going to put them up, and I think that they say their date back to 3.5 million years ago.
Yes, so these are the Laetoli footprints of Tanzania, and they're made in volcanic ash, which means that, 3.5 million years ago, some little hominids, some little early humans walked across still warm volcanic ash to make these footprints, and then it cooled. And the good thing about volcanic ash is that you can date it because it's radioactive dating. So you have radioactive isotopes like carbon isotopes that change from one to another over time, and that's how you date it. And in volcanic ash, it's potassium and potassium argon that is used to date. And so we have a very good dating on these Laetoli footprints. What's interesting about the footprints is that it really shows that we started walking upright around 3.5 million, maybe even 4 million years ago. This was way before we had a big brain. The brain size of the individuals who were living at this time was about maybe a third of our size, still twice the size of like the average chimp maybe, but much smaller than ours, right? So it's maybe 450 cubic centimeters or so, as opposed to our 1,200. But the other thing is that it does suggest that this was a small family group, because there's some bigger footprints and some smaller footprints, and there's even kind of a pattern where it looks like almost like a child followed in the footprints tried to step in the same footprints of their parents. So that's kind of a cute little anecdote there. And these are one of the only set of footprints we've ever found. There are some footprints in Mexico, I believe, or New Mexico, I can't remember, that some people have estimated to be 22,000 years old. That's quite interesting as well, because if they are 22,000 years old, they would be the oldest oldest evidence of humans in North America.
Wow. And like I said, I said I didn't want to start anything, but it seems like we've been going through some really hard times for millions of years. It almost makes you wonder, wow, how did we ever come through that and get to where we are today?
Yeah.
I'm not
think
saying
that...
it was aliens.
I'm not saying it was aliens, but George Tsoukalakis might say it.
I had to. I'm sorry. I had to.
Thank goodness for our big brains. We figured out a lot, but also some good fortune. The Ice Age was a really miserable time, and then it ended, which gave rise to the ability of us to think about things like, figure out things like farming, agriculture, food availability, right? But I also think that, I'd like to think that even if we were faced with really hard times again, that we would be able to overcome those. And it really isn't that long ago that we faced hardships. Even if you look at just 500 years ago, there was life was a lot harder, maybe even 150 years ago. So I do think that we are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for, even if right now we're kind of being, riding this easy wave.
Right. And maybe we'll have you on some other time to talk about ancient apocalypses with us, but we won't, we won't get into that. We won't get into that tonight. We're so pleased to have Dr. Elizabeth Weiss with us tonight, anthropologist, author of On the Warpath, which you can pick up in the link in the show description. Just click on it and you can buy it right now. It'll probably be at your house in a couple of days. And if you live somewhere lucky enough, a drone might deliver it sometime tonight for you. For all we know. And Elizabeth, it's not often we get an anthropologist on the show with us. So I would like to close the hot take segment with one final hot take from you.
Okay.
And a personal favorite subject of ours, of course, Bigfoot. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Gigantopithecus.
Yes.
What's your hot take?
So out of all the paranormal things that I think could be true, Bigfoot would be the most likely. And here's why. Because we are still discovering a variety of species in parts of the world. I don't remember what year it was, but maybe it was 2 years ago. They talked about they have found 40 different new species in the Amazon of various reptiles and amphibians, birds, whatever. And I think if there is anything that is likely to be true, it's going to be that we find a new species. And why not have it be something like a Bigfoot, we could be one of, in my mind, a variety of things. It could be a type of very smart bear. And I actually think that we don't give animals enough credit. I always think, if you're going to think, how smart is that animal? My feeling is give it more credit than you think it deserves, because that would probably be the more correct answer. But it could be primate. It could be, something like else. But the other thing is that there are some animals that their skeletal remains look remarkably human when you see the skeletal remains because of size and because of their actions. In Africa, big cat bones are oftentimes confused with early human bones because they're so similar. The leg bones, because some of the big cats get on their hind legs scratching a tree, right, or climbing up a tree. So they have some of the same biomechanics. So, I'm not saying that hook, line, and sinker, I believe it, but I'm saying that if there's any other paranormal that is going to turn out to be accurate or true, I'd place my bet on Bigfoot.
Well, that's great because you're saying there's a chance. So we'll take it.
We'll run with that, yes. Well, I think we do have a listener question that we would like to get in here before we let you go. So this comes from Joel Martin, who has been very active in our chat. Thank you, Joel. And Joel, I will go ahead and watch Stargate. Thanks for forcing me to do my homework. Okay, so Joel says, within your study of bones, have you ever seen any unknown marks like bite marks or massive breaks where there shouldn't be?
Oh, you know what? I have seen some very interesting breaks or unknown marks that I thought, what is this? What is this going on here? And I'll give one of the best examples that I can think of is one of my last studies was actually about this huge bump on the back of the skull that I was looking at, about a 2,000-year-old skull, and it had this golf ball size bump on the back of the head, and I'm like, what is that? And I basically got, we were thinking, is it a tumor? Is it, bone tumor? What is it? And we took an x-ray and we actually saw that there was a hairline fracture on the bottom of that bump. And it was a trauma from being hit on the back in a way that then probably caused a muscle reaction to occur, like a muscle pull or so. And then that caused excessive bone buildup, maybe even a blood clot that then ossified. And you get this bump on the head instead of an indent. There also, then sometimes you'll see, like, one of the interesting things I saw in the Carthage collection that I was interested in further investigating but didn't get the chance to, was there were cut marks on the cheek of this individual. I think that they were trying to drain some infection on this individual. And this individual also had a trephination, so a cut hole on the skull. And I had never seen these kind of cut marks on a cheekbone before. So that's another example. Why would they have done that? Was it successful in a sense because they did have some healing? And why was it done? So that's another thing. So when you look at these skeletons, every time you look at them, you see something interesting and something further to explore. Sometimes it's, learning more about human variation. For example, some people have a hole in their sternum, their breastbone, where people have mistaken that for a bullet hole, and it actually is just a naturally occurring hole that has no impact. But knowing that has actually been very important for people who do surgery and for acupuncture and other things, because if you go through that hole accidentally, you can kill the person right away. And so anthropologists were the ones to discover that the sternum sometimes has this hole that's just variant. So there's all sorts of things like that.
Wow, that is incredible and certainly good information to know for
Yes.
surgeons and acupuncturists. That's scary. So what a great question. And this has been such a fantastic conversation. You are an expert in this area. It's been fun to hear your answers to so many things that we brought to you. Tell our listeners where they can learn more about you, follow your research. What's the best way to get in touch?
So I have a Twitter account, obviously.
It's not banned yet, so.
And my Twitter handle is @Weiss Unburied, all one word, all lowercase, Weiss Unburied. I also have a website that the link is on the Twitter account, and I have, you can buy the book through Amazon or any of the online sellers. It sells from the pretty much all the online sellers. On the Warpath, my battles with Indians, Pretendians, and woke warriors.
Wonderful. And again, we have a link in our chat here if you want to pick up that book today. And we appreciate you coming on. We do have some merchandise for sale as well. I saw Dr. Mounts put his hat on there in our YouTube store. Super fancy. We've got some good stuff there. I love my mug. I use my mug every single day. So we do hope that all those of you who are listening will support us as well. Check out our YouTube store. You can also check out our new website at allthingsunexplained.com. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, share, comment, all of those fun things so that we can keep producing these wonderful shows with such intelligent people like Dr. Elizabeth Weiss. We are so grateful for you. Is there anything else you would like to share before we sign off for the evening?
No, any other questions that come in, people who watch this and have other questions, feel free to put them in the comments on the YouTube. You do that. I do look at those and then answer them. And I also, if you have questions and on Twitter, feel free to send a tweet, and I do answer questions on those too.
Yes. Great. And we do appreciate all of our comments that we get on YouTube. And we're grateful to everybody that keeps an open mind and that stays positive. And of course, we're always open to feedback too. We don't ignore those comments, but we have a really wonderful community of people here that are, I would say, enlightened. We had somebody on our show, Becky Cook, who's a Bigfoot expert, and she once told us that her mom always told her our brains are a lot like a parachute and they work a lot better if they are open. So we've got to be open to each other's ideas and preferences. So thank you all for joining us. We have some big shows coming up. We'll be hopping on Cosmic Convergence show next weekend. We have some other great guests coming on ours, so we hope you all will join us. Tim, I'm going to throw it to you for last words.
All right, thanks for joining us on this episode of All Things Unexplained, where we explored anthropology and beyond with our esteemed guest, anthropologist Dr. Elizabeth Weiss. We hope you found our dive into the depths of human history as fascinating as we did. Don't forget to subscribe, like, rate, comment, share. Check out our YouTube store. You can pick up one of these cool hats and lots of other things. Join us next time as we continue to uncover the unexplained. Until then, get off your screens, head out into the woods, go squatching, get out somewhere dark, away from the light pollution, look for UFOs, watch the sky. You know, while you may not find a Bigfoot, you may not see a UFO, you might just find yourself. Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Bye. That must be New York, where I'm hearing those sirens in the background.
My cue for the outro, the sirens.
All Things Unexplained.
What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
All Things Unexplained is free to watch on YouTube and listen to wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support our show, you can visit our YouTube store. Additionally, you can find us on Venmo under All Things Unexplained. Be sure to check out our website, allthingsunexplained.com. All proceeds from the sales of Dr. Mounce's books on Amazon and Audible also go straight to our show.